Anna sat quietly in the dimly lit room, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn photograph of her young son, Eli. His bright smile, framed by messy curls, was her sole source of strength. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest, but she knew she had no other choice. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs, the sound of polished shoes clicking against marble floors echoing in the vast hall. Tonight, Anna would be auctioned, not as a person but as an opportunity, a woman willing to sign a contract to bear a child for one of the wealthiest men in the world. In the corner of the grand hall, Cris, a man whose wealth was matched only by his mysterious aura, observed the proceedings. He was here for one reason: to secure an heir. When Anna's name was called, she stepped onto the stage, her legs trembling under the piercing stares of the crowd. Chris's sharp gaze locked onto her, and without hesitation, he made his bid. The gavel struck. Sold! Anna's life had just changed forever. Anna hadn't always been this desperate. There were days, not long ago, when life was simpler, even if it wasn't perfect. She'd spend her mornings laughing with Eli over breakfast, his giggles filling their small but cozy apartment. But over time, the bills piled up. The landlord's threats of eviction grew more frequent, and the sight of Eli going to bed hungry became unbearable. Her love for her son was her guiding light, but it also came with a weight she couldn't bear alone. Every decision she made was for him, but no matter how hard she tried, it never seemed enough. When Anna heard about the auction, it felt like the last shred of hope. The idea horrified her, standing on a stage, reduced to a commodity. But the promise of financial security for Eli made her push aside her pride. She told herself it wasn't about her. It was about ensuring that Eli would never have to endure the struggles she faced. As she sat in the waiting room of the grand hall, surrounded by other women, her stomach churned with fear. Her mind raced with doubts. Was this the right choice? Would Eli understand someday, or would he resent her for it? But the thought of his innocent face and the warmth of his small arms around her gave her strength. If this was what it took to give him a chance at a better future, then so be it. Anna took a deep breath and rose to her feet. She didn't have a choice. She never had. Cris Zaid sat at the far end of the hall, his piercing eyes scanning the stage as if weighing each woman's worth with a single glance. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, he exuded power and authority, yet his expression remained unreadable. Cris wasn't here for pleasure or amusement. He was here for a purpose. A child to carry on his legacy. For Cris, emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford. His life revolved around control, precision, and calculated decisions. The idea of a traditional family held no appeal to him, yet the pressure to produce an heir was relentless. He saw the auction as a solution, a way to secure what he needed without entanglements or distractions. When Anna stepped onto the stage, her vulnerability was evident. Her trembling hands, the way her eyes darted nervously, and the slight hitch in her breath spoke volumes. She wasn't like the others. She didn't carry an air of confidence or ambition. She carried something else: desperation and strength. 5 million, Cris's deep voice cut through the murmurs, silencing the crowd. The auctioneer paused, startled by the bold bid, and quickly declared her sold. Later that evening, Anna sat across from Cris in a private room. The opulence of the space was overwhelming, with gilded furniture and towering bookshelves. But Cris's cold demeanor was what unnerved her the most. He slid a crisp envelope across the table. "This is the contract," he said firmly. "Read it carefully." Anna's hands shook as she opened it. The terms were clear. She would live in his estate, undergo medical procedures to conceive a child, and leave after the birth. In return, she would receive a life-changing sum of money. "Do you understand what this means?" Cris asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Anna met his gaze, her fear barely concealed. "I do," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Then sign," he said, placing a pen on the table. Her chest tightened, but she thought of Eli. With trembling hands, Anna signed her name, sealing a fate she couldn't undo. Anna arrived at Cris's sprawling estate in the early morning, the towering gates parting slowly to reveal a world she could never have imagined. The mansion, surrounded by immaculate gardens and shimmering fountains, seemed to stretch endlessly. Its grandeur only made her feel smaller, more out of place. As the limousine pulled to a stop, a butler greeted her with a polite but detached nod, ushering her inside. Cris was waiting in the grand foyer, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp gaze fixed on her. "Welcome," he said curtly. "You'll find your accommodations prepared. Amira, my housekeeper, will show you around and explain the rules." His voice carried no warmth, and Anna could feel the weight of his control in every word. Amira, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, led her through the endless hallways. Despite her gentle demeanor, Anna sensed an unspoken caution in the way Amira interacted with her. In her room, a space larger than her entire apartment, Anna found a wardrobe filled with elegant clothes, all carefully selected for her. She hesitated before touching anything, feeling like a guest in someone else's life. Days turned into weeks, and her interactions with Cris remained strictly formal. They shared sparse conversations, mostly about the logistics of the agreement. Cris treated her as though she were another asset in his meticulously controlled world. Yet, Anna couldn't ignore the glimpses of humanity she occasionally saw in him. Once, she found him in the garden, carefully pruning a bonsai tree. His focus was intense, and when she asked about it, he simply replied, "It belonged to my mother." His voice softened ever so slightly, and for a moment, Anna saw something deeper, a man shaped by loss and isolation. But those moments were fleeting. Most of the time, Cris was distant, his walls firmly in place. Anna spent her days wandering the mansion, feeling more like a prisoner than a participant in this arrangement. She thought often of Eli, wondering if she had made the right choice. At night, as she lay in the enormous bed, she clung to the thought of him, her only source of comfort in this cold, unfamiliar world. Anna had done her best to keep her personal life hidden, but secrets have a way of surfacing. One evening, while exploring the mansion, Cris walked into her room unannounced. His sharp gaze immediately landed on a photograph sitting on her nightstand, a picture of a young boy with curly hair and a bright smile. He picked it up, his expression unreadable, before turning to face her. "Who is this?" he asked, his tone calm but edged with curiosity. Anna's heart raced. She had feared this moment, but knew it couldn't be avoided forever. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "He's my son. His name is Eli." Chris's brow furrowed as he set the photograph back on the nightstand with deliberate care. "You didn't mention you had a child before signing the contract. Why hide this?" Anna hesitated, her voice trembling. "I was afraid you'd reject me. For the agreement. I needed this. For him." "For him?" Chris's tone hardened slightly. "You agreed to bring another child into this world, yet you left your own son behind. How do you reconcile that?" Tears welled up in Anna's eyes. "Because I didn't have a choice," she admitted, her voice breaking. "We were barely surviving. The bills, the hunger. I couldn't let Eli suffer anymore. This was my only way to secure his future." Cris stood silently, his sharp features softening ever so slightly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his tone unusually gentle. "Bring him here." Anna blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "What?" "Your son," Cris clarified, his gaze steady. "He shouldn't be separated from his mother. Have him live here. It will be easier for you to care for him, and it ensures you won't be distracted." Anna's breath caught in her throat. The idea of having Eli close to her, safe and cared for, was something she hadn't dared to hope for. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to contain the relief and gratitude coursing through her. Cris nodded curtly, already turning to leave. "I'll have Amira prepare a room for him. Make the arrangements." As the door closed behind him, Anna collapsed onto the bed, tears streaming down her face. For the first time since signing the contract, she felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to give Eli a better life, even within the confines of this strange and uncertain arrangement. A week later, the mansion came alive with the sound of a child's laughter. Eli's wide eyes sparkled with wonder as he explored the sprawling estate, his small hands reaching out to touch the luxurious furnishings and curious decorations. For Anna, seeing him here, safe and happy, felt like a dream she didn't dare believe was real. Cris observed Eli from a distance, his usually stoic expression betraying a hint of curiosity. He wasn't accustomed to children, and the boy's energy was a stark contrast to the quiet, rigid environment he had cultivated. Still, there was something disarming about Eli's innocent enthusiasm. One afternoon, as Cris worked in his study, Eli peeked around the doorframe. "What are you doing?" the boy asked baldly, his head tilted with curiosity. Cris looked up, momentarily taken aback. "I'm reviewing documents," he replied, his tone even. Eli wandered in, unabashed. "Is it fun?" Cris couldn't help but chuckle, a sound that surprised even himself. "Not particularly," he admitted. Anna appeared moments later, breathless and apologetic. "I'm so sorry," she began, reaching for Eli's hand. "I told him not to disturb you." "It's fine," Cris interrupted, his voice calm but thoughtful. "Curiosity can lead to growth. Maybe one day he'll be running his own empire." Anna blinked, startled by his unexpected response. In that brief exchange, she saw a side of Cris she hadn't before, a man who, beneath his cold exterior, might have the capacity for kindness. Over time, small moments like this began to accumulate. Cris made an effort to include Eli in his daily life, from inviting him to walk through the gardens to teaching him simple games of strategy. Though his gestures were subtle and understated, Anna noticed them all. One evening, as Anna tucked Eli into bed, he looked up at her with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Cris is nice," he said simply, his words carrying the innocent sincerity of a child. Anna smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "He's learning to be," she replied. That night, as she sat on the balcony, gazing at the stars, Anna felt a shift within her. The walls around Cris seemed to be cracking, piece by piece, and for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if this arrangement could become something more. Months passed, and the mansion began to feel less like a gilded cage and more like a home. Anna watched as Cris and Eli grew closer, their bond forming in ways she hadn't anticipated. Cris, once distant and reserved, now spent his evenings playing chess with Eli or answering his endless questions about the world. But it was during a quiet afternoon in the garden that everything began to change. Anna had been watching from the balcony as Cris helped Eli plant a small flower in the corner of the meticulously maintained garden. The sight stirred something in her, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. That evening, as Anna settled Eli into bed, she lingered at his door, her heart heavy with thoughts of their future. Chris's gestures had been kind, but they didn't erase the reality of the contract. Soon, the child she was carrying would be born, and she would be expected to leave. Later that night, as Anna sat in the library with a book she wasn't really reading, Cris entered the room. His presence filled the space, but for once, it didn't feel imposing. "We need to talk," he said, his voice softer than usual. Anna set the book aside, her heart quickening. "About what?" Cris sat across from her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "About the contract," he began. "I know it was meant to be a simple agreement. You'd have the child and then leave." Anna's stomach tightened. She nodded but didn't speak. "But things have changed," Cris continued, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Having Eli here, seeing how you've made this house feel alive, I can't imagine it going back to how it was." Anna's breath caught as his words sank in. She met his gaze, searching for any sign of hesitation, but found none. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying I don't want you to leave," Cris said firmly. "Not you, not Eli, not the baby. I want us to try to build something real." Anna felt her heart swell with conflicting emotions. Hope, fear, and disbelief. She had longed to hear these words, but she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. "Cris," she began, her voice trembling, "this isn't something we can decide lightly." "I know," he replied, leaning forward, "but I'm willing to try if you are." For the first time, Anna allowed herself to believe that their story could have a different ending. The days following Chris's confession were filled with quiet but meaningful changes. He called his lawyers to revise the contract, removing the clause that required Anna to leave after the baby was born. Instead, he outlined a future where she and Eli could stay, not as obligations, but as a family. When Cris shared the revised contract with Anna, she hesitated, her hands trembling as she held the papers. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cris met her gaze, his expression sincere. "Because I don't want you to feel trapped," he said softly. "I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you're bound by a piece of paper." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. For the first time, she felt seen, not as part of an agreement, but as someone who mattered. One evening, Anna approached Cris in the library, holding an envelope in her hand. She hesitated at the door before softly calling his name. He looked up from the document he was reviewing, immediately noticing the nervous energy about her. "Is something wrong?" he asked, standing and walking toward her. Anna took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with emotion as she handed him the envelope. "No, not wrong," she began, her voice trembling. "I just thought you should know." Cris opened the envelope and pulled out a medical report. His eyes scanned the page, and then he froze. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if the words on the page carried a weight he wasn't prepared for. Slowly, his gaze lifted to meet Anna's. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost disbelieving, but there was a glimmer of something else. Joy. Anna nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I just found out today," she admitted. "I wasn't sure how to tell you, but here we are." For a moment, Cris said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, a smile broke across his face, small at first, but growing until it lit up his usually reserved features. "Anna, this is incredible," he said, his voice full of genuine joy. The warmth in his reaction made tears spill down Anna's cheeks. "I wasn't sure how you'd feel," she confessed. "How could I feel anything but happy?" Cris replied, stepping closer and taking her hands in his. "You've given me something I never thought I'd have. A family. This child, Eli, you've changed everything for me." The announcement brought a new energy to the mansion. Cris and Eli worked together to prepare the nursery, carefully assembling a crib while Anna watched with quiet amusement. Eli was thrilled by the news, eagerly declaring himself the baby's big brother and proudly telling anyone who would listen. One quiet evening, as the three of them sat in the garden beneath a blanket of stars, Eli leaned against Chris's arm. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" he asked, his voice filled with innocent hope. Cris smiled, placing a gentle hand on Eli's shoulder. "Yes," he said firmly, his voice carrying an assurance that even Eli could understand. Looking at Anna, his eyes softened with a tenderness that spoke volumes. "We are a family now, and that will never change." For Anna, the journey had been unexpected and challenging, but as she sat there with Eli and Cris, she realized they had built something worth fighting for: a home, a future, and a family. Months passed, and the mansion transformed into a place of warmth and laughter. Eli's cheerful voice echoed through the grand halls as he explored every corner of his new home, his happiness contagious. The nursery was finally ready, adorned with soft pastels, plush toys, and a mobile that twinkled with little stars. Anna marveled at the sight, her heart swelling with gratitude as she realized how far they had come. Cris, once a man defined by his cold precision, now embraced the chaos and joy that came with family. He spent his mornings working, but his afternoons were reserved for walks in the garden with Anna and Eli. He had even taken to reading bedtime stories to Eli, a ritual that became their special time together. One evening, Cris surprised Anna with a small celebration in the garden, stringing fairy lights across the trees and setting up a candlelit table. As they sat together, he raised his glass. "To you," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "for giving me what I didn't even know I needed. A family, a home, and hope." Anna smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears. "And to you," she replied softly, for proving that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to something beautiful. The months leading to the baby's birth were a time of growth for all of them. Chris's once empty mansion now buzzed with life, its coldness replaced by the warmth of a family learning to love and trust. The night their baby arrived, Cris held the tiny newborn in his arms, his eyes glistening with emotion. He looked at Anna, who was resting after a long labor, and whispered, "He's perfect, just like his mother." As Anna drifted into sleep, Cris sat beside her, their son nestled in his arms. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, now pulsed with life and love. Together, they had turned an improbable arrangement into a life they never could have imagined, a family bound not by a contract, but by something far stronger: love. What did you think of Anna and Chris's journey? Would you have made the same choices? Share your thoughts in the comments below and rate this story from 0 to 10. If you enjoyed this heartfelt tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one.